A 22-year-old woman with nothing left buys an abandoned coastal station for 10 and finds a logbook written by a man who never stopped watching the sea. As she tries to rebuild the place, she's forced to give up the last thing tying her to her past, only to uncover something hidden that could change her future forever. But when a voice calls for help in the middle of the night, she has to decide: leave or become the one who keeps the light on. If this story pulled you in even a little, feel free to like and share it with someone who might need it tonight. And if you enjoy quiet, meaningful stories like this, you can subscribe and stick around, there's more coming. Also, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it for you? Lara Vance was 22 years old the morning she realized she didn't have anywhere left to go. Not in the dramatic movie kind of way, no eviction notice taped to a door, no final argument that slammed things shut. It was quieter than that. The kind of realization that creeps in while you standing in someone else's kitchen, holding a chipped coffee mug that isn't yours, knowing you can't stay much longer but having no idea where you'd go if you left. A few months earlier, she still had something that resembled a life. It wasn't perfect, not even close, but it was hers. There was the boat, her father's boat, really. Though he had started calling it theirs sometime during her last year working with him. A small trawler that smelled like diesel and salt and old rope, the kind of smell that never really washes out. There was the routine too. Waking up before dawn without an alarm, moving through the dark by muscle memory. Coffee brewing while the sky was still deciding what kind of day it was going to be. It was hard work, the kind that settled deep into your bones, but it made sense. Every hour had a purpose. Every movement led to something real. Then her father died just like that. No long illness, no warning. One night he fell asleep in his chair with the TV still on, and by morning he was gone. The kind of ending that feels almost disrespectfully simple for a man who had spent his entire life wrestling with the ocean. After that, everything unraveled faster than she could keep up with. Bills she didn't know existed started showing up, insurance that had lapsed, repairs that had been put off one too many seasons. And then Mara stepped in, efficient, composed, already thinking 3 steps ahead in a way Lyra never had. Mara wasn't wrong. That was the thing that made it harder. She laid everything out at the kitchen table like it was a business deal, not the slow dismantling of a life. The house had to be sold. The boat had to go. There was no way around it. Numbers didn't bend just because you wished they would. Lara sat there, listening, understanding every word and hating all of it. Not because it didn't make sense, but because it did. By the time the paperwork was done, the life Lyra had known was gone in a way that felt clean on paper and devastating in reality. The boat left first. She watched it disappear past the jetty, smaller and smaller until it was just another shape against the horizon. That should have been the moment she cried, but she didn't. It felt too final, like if she let herself feel it all at once, there'd be nothing left to hold on to afterward. The house went next. After that, she packed what little she kept into a single canvas bag, mostly her father's things, not hers. She didn't touch the money from the sale. It sat in her account like it belonged to someone else, something she wasn't ready to claim or spend or even fully acknowledge. So she rented a room above a fish house for cheap, the kind of place that always smelled faintly like salt and metal, no matter how many windows you opened. The walls were thin. The floor creaked. At night she could hear the hum of generators and the low murmur of voices from the docks below. It wasn't home, but it was something. For a while that had to be enough. She found work mending nets during the day. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't steady, but it paid just enough to keep her from falling completely behind. Hours bent over rough fiber, fingers moving in small, repetitive motions until they went numb. Tiny cuts lined her hands, too shallow to matter on their own, but constant enough to sting every time she washed them. By the end of each shift, her shoulders ached in that dull, familiar way that reminded her of being out on the boat, except now there was no horizon, no movement, no sense of going anywhere. Just the same pile of torn nets waiting for her the next morning. People told her she was lucky in their own way. She had money, technically. More than most people around there ever saw at one time. But that money didn't feel real to her. It felt like something sealed off, tied to a version of her life that no longer existed. Spending it felt wrong, like erasing something she wasn't ready to let go of yet. So she didn't. She lived small instead. Cheaper. Quieter. Like if she didn't move too fast, the world might give her a minute to catch up. Mara called every so often, checking in, always circling back to the same suggestion: come to the city, stay with her for a while, figure things out. It wasn't an unreasonable offer, it was probably the smart one. But every time Lyra tried to picture it, it felt like trying on someone else's life. Clean apartments, office jobs, streets that didn't smell like salt water. It wasn't that she thought she couldn't do it. It was that something in her resisted the idea completely, like a compass needle refusing to point anywhere, but back to the water. So she stayed, not because she had a plan, but because leaving felt worse. Days blurred together, work, sleep, repeat. The kind of routine that doesn't build toward anything, just keeps you from falling apart. She told herself it was temporary, that eventually she'd figure something out, that this wasn't all there was. But some nights, lying awake in that narrow room with the sound of the docks below, she wasn't so sure. That was the version of her life right before everything shifted. Not in a big, obvious way. There was no single moment where things clearly changed direction. Just a slow, almost invisible turn, starting with a late night, a flickering laptop screen, and a listing she almost didn't click on. Lyra didn't buy the station because she believed in it. That would have been easier to explain. People understand belief, even when it's misplaced. What they don't understand is the quiet kind of decision you make when you out of better options, when something small and unlikely just happens to exist at the exact moment you need somewhere anywhere to land. The listing showed up late at night while she was half scrolling, half staring at her laptop. The glow of the screen the only light in the room. Decommissioned coastal station, county surplus is $10. She almost laughed when she saw the price, assumed it had to be a typo or some bureaucratic joke. But the photos were real. Weathered gray shingles, a squat tower rising out of the center. Sand pushing up against the foundation like the ocean had been trying to take it back for years. It looked less like a building and more like something that had been forgotten on purpose. She stared at it longer than she meant to. Not because it was beautiful, it wasn't, but because it was there. Still standing, still unsold, still unwanted. By the time she closed the laptop, the idea had already settled somewhere in her mind, quiet but persistent. The next morning, she called the number on the listing before she could talk herself out of it. The woman on the other end sounded bored, like she'd answered the same question too many times already. Yes, the price was correct. Yes, it came with the land. No, there were no utilities connected. No, the county wouldn't be responsible for anything once the paperwork went through. It was, in every sense, exactly what it sounded like: a neglected structure sitting in a place most people didn't want to deal with. Lyra didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. There wasn't much to misunderstand. By that afternoon, she'd signed the paperwork, transferred the $10, and just like that, she owned something again. It didn't feel like winning. It felt more like stepping into a space that had been waiting, even if it had been waiting for the wrong reasons. Getting there was its own kind of test. The stations sat far enough out that you couldn't just drive up to it without planning around the tides. And Lyra didn't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. She borrowed a small skiff from the fish house, loaded it with what little she thought she'd need: tools, a few supplies, a change of clothes, and her father's old canvas bag, and pushed off before sunrise. The water was calm, but not friendly, the kind of stillness that always made her feel like the ocean was watching more than resting. The ride out took longer than she expected. The shoreline thinned behind her, replaced by open stretches of water and low strips of sand that barely looked solid enough to stand on. By the time the station came into view, it didn't feel like she was arriving somewhere new. It felt like she had crossed into a place that didn't really belong to anything else anymore. Up close, the building was worse than the photos had shown. The siding had turned that dull silver, gray that only comes from years of salt and wind, the kind that strips color out of everything. One corner of the porch sagged slightly, not enough to collapse but enough to make you notice. The windows were clouded over, some cracked, others coated in a film of dirt that had long since stopped trying to be cleaned away by rain. The door stuck when she tried to open it, swollen from moisture or just warped by time. She had to lean her shoulder into it, pushing harder than she expected before it finally gave with a dull, resistant creak. The air inside hit her first. Stale, heavy, layered with the smell of damp wood and something older she couldn't quite place. Not rot exactly, but close enough that it made her hesitate for half a second before stepping fully inside. The floorboards groaned under her weight, not dangerously, just enough to remind her that nothing here had been maintained in a long time. Light filtered in through the windows in thin, uneven lines, catching dust that hung in the air like it had been waiting for someone to disturb it. For a moment, she just stood there, letting her eyes adjust, taking in the space without trying to fix it yet. It was bigger than she expected, or maybe it just felt that way because it was so empty. No furniture left behind, no signs of recent use. Just a structure that had been closed up and walked away from. She moved through it slowly, room by room, not rushing, not speaking. The kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just unfinished. There was a staircase leading up to the second floor, narrow and worn in the middle from years of use that had nothing to do with her. She tested each step before putting her full weight down. The wood complaining but holding. Upstairs, the rooms were smaller, more confined, but they had windows facing the water, and for the first time since she arrived, she could see something beyond the decay. The ocean stretched out in every direction, uninterrupted, indifferent. It didn't care about the building or her, or anything else happening on that strip of land, and somehow, that made it easier to breathe. The tower was the last place she checked. A ladder instead of proper stairs, leading up into a cramped space with windows on all sides. The glass was clearer up here, less obstructed, like whoever had last used this room had at least cared about being able to see out. She climbed up, steady but cautious, and when she reached the top, she paused again. The view was different from anywhere she'd been before. Not better, not worse. Just higher, more exposed. You could see everything and nothing at the same time. The kind of place where you'd notice something if it changed, even slightly. She stayed up there longer than she planned to. Not thinking about what needed to be fixed, not making lists, not trying to turn it into something useful yet. Just standing there, letting the space settle around her. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't welcoming, but it wasn't pushing her out either. And after everything that had happened over the past few months, that was enough. By the time she climbed back down, the sun had shifted, light cutting through the windows at a different angle, softer, less harsh. She set her bag down near the wall. The same canvas bag she'd been carrying everywhere since she left the house. And for the first time since she'd bought the place, she allowed herself to think it, just once without overanalyzing it. She could stay here. Not forever. She wasn't thinking that far ahead, but long enough to figure out what came next. Long enough to not be in someone else's space, living by someone else's rules, answering to expectations she didn't feel connected to anymore. This place didn't expect anything from her. It didn't care if she fixed it or left it exactly as it was. It wasn't offering comfort or stability or even safety. But it was offering something she hadn't had in a while. A place that hadn't already decided who she was supposed to be. The first few days at the station didn't feel like the beginning of anything. If anything, they felt like a continuation of the same stuck feeling Lyra had carried with her, just in a different location. There was no moment where she woke up and thought, "This is it, this is where things change." It was slower than that. More practical. She spent most of her time doing small, necessary things, clearing out sand that had blown in through broken gaps, forcing windows open that hadn't been touched in years, figuring out which parts of the floor she could trust and which ones she couldn't. It wasn't meaningful work, not yet. Just survival, same as before. The difference was, no one was watching. No one was expecting anything from her. If she stopped halfway through the day and did nothing, nothing would happen. That kind of freedom was heavier than she expected. She slept on the second floor in a corner room that had the least amount of damage. No bed, just a blanket and her bag rolled up under her head. Nights were louder than she thought they'd be. Wind pushing against the walls, the low, constant sound of the ocean hitting the shore, sometimes so steady it faded into the background, other times sharp enough to pull her out of sleep. It wasn't peaceful, but it wasn't unfamiliar either. There was a rhythm to it, something her body recognized even if her mind hadn't caught up yet. On the third day, she started going through the tower. Not because she had a plan, but because she'd run out of easier things to fix. The ladder up was rough under her hands, splintered in places, but it held. The room at the top was tighter than she remembered, hotter during the day, colder at night. Light came in from all sides, making it feel exposed, like there was nowhere to hide up there. She moved slowly, checking corners, running her hand along the walls, more out of habit than intention. That's when she noticed it, not something obvious, just a slight inconsistency. A section of the wall near the base that didn't sit quite flush. like it had been adjusted at some point and never fully settled back into place. Most people probably wouldn't have paid attention to it, but Lyra had spent enough time around boats, around things built by hand and repaired over time, to recognize when something had been altered. She didn't rush it. She went back down, found a flat tool, came back up, and worked the edge carefully until the panel shifted just enough to open. Inside there wasn't much, no gold, no hidden stash, nothing dramatic. Just a single object resting in a narrow cavity, a logbook. Leather-bound, worn at the edges, the kind of wear that comes from being handled regularly, not stored away. She hesitated before touching it, not out of fear, just awareness. Like she was stepping into something that had been left alone on purpose. When she finally picked it up, it felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, something else. She brought it downstairs, set it on the floor near where she'd been sleeping, and didn't open it right away. She made herself wait, finished what she'd been doing earlier, moved a few boards, checked a window latch. Small things. Like she needed to earn the right to sit down with it. That night, with the light fading and the room settling into shadow, she opened it. The entries were handwritten, consistent, steady. Dates, times, weather conditions, small notes about the sea. At first glance, it looked like routine documentation. The kind of record you keep because you're supposed to. But the more she read, the more it shifted. It wasn't just data. It was observation, attention. Every entry felt like someone was actively looking, not just recording what was already obvious. There were notes about distant lights that might have been boats, about changes in wind direction that hadn't shown up on any chart, about long stretches of nothing where nothing happened, and the fact that nothing happened was still written down. She found the name a few pages in, alias Ward, not introduced, not explained. Just signed at the end of entries, over and over, like a quiet confirmation that someone had been there, consistently, without needing to make it a story. She kept reading, flipping through days, months, years. The entries didn't try to impress. They didn't build toward anything dramatic. But taken together, they created something heavier, pattern, a presence. Then she reached the last entry. It was shorter than the others, more direct. The station was being decommissioned. Orders had come through. Final watch completed. Sea calm. No vessels in distress. And then one line that stopped her longer than anything else in the book. Not written for record. Written for whoever came after. He didn't say much. Just enough to make it clear that this place had never really been about the building. That it had been about the act of paying attention. Of being there, even when there was nothing to see. Especially then. Lyra closed the book and sat there for a while, not moving, not thinking in any structured way. Just letting it settle. It didn't hit her all at once. It wasn't some sudden realization that changed everything. It was quieter, more persistent. Like something had shifted slightly under the surface. And she hadn't fully understood it yet. The next morning, she didn't wake up with a plan. But she did something different. Instead of just fixing what was broken enough to get through the day, she started looking at the structure differently. Not as a temporary place to stay, but as something that could be restored. Not perfectly. Not back to what it had been. But enough to function again. Enough to matter. She started small. Reinforcing a section of the floor that had been soft underfoot, cleaning out a corner room more thoroughly than necessary, checking the roofline from outside, marking the spots that needed attention. It wasn't efficient work. She didn't have the tools or the materials to do it properly yet. But that wasn't the point. The point was that she kept going, one thing leading into another, not because she had a clear end goal, but because stopping felt wrong in a way it hadn't before. The logbook stayed close. She didn't carry it around, didn't treat it like something fragile. But she read from it at night, a few pages at a time. Not looking for answers, just staying connected to it. There was something about the consistency of it that grounded her. The idea that someone had stood in that same place day after day, with no guarantee that it mattered and did it anyway. At some point, without really marking the moment, Lyra stopped thinking of the station as temporary. She stopped telling herself she'd leave once she figured things out. Instead, she started measuring time differently. Not in how long she'd been there, but in what had changed since she arrived. A board replaced, a window cleared, a space made usable again, small, almost insignificant improvements. But they added up. It wasn't hope, exactly, not the kind people talk about. It was something quieter than that. Something closer to purpose, even if she wouldn't have used that word out loud. She wasn't trying to rebuild her old life. She wasn't trying to escape it either. She was just continuing something. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough to keep going. The work didn't become meaningful all at once. It stayed hard, repetitive, and most days, frustrating in a way that didn't feel cinematic or inspiring. Lara would wake up stiff from sleeping on the floor, her back tight, her hands already sore before she even started moving. Some mornings she'd lie there for a minute longer than she needed to, listening to the wind push against the siding, wondering not for the first time what exactly she was doing out here. There was no deadline, no one checking progress. No guarantee any of it would lead to something better. Just a long list of things that needed fixing and not enough resources to do it properly. She started with what she could control. Reinforcing beams, patching gaps, clearing out years of neglect one section at a time. But it didn't take long before she hit the limits of what effort alone could solve. The roof had damage she couldn't ignore much longer. Sections of the exterior needed materials she didn't have. Even basic things, proper tools, sealant, replacement wood started to add up. She stretched what little she had, reused what she could, made things work longer than they should have. But eventually it caught up with her. The first real setback came late in the afternoon, a few weeks in. She had been working along the outer edge of the roofline, trying to secure a section that had loosened under years of wind. It wasn't a dramatic fall, no storm, no big moment, just a misstep. The wood gave slightly under her weight, her balance shifted, and before she could correct it, she slipped. She didn't fall far, but far enough. She hit the lower section hard, the impact knocking the breath out of her in a way that made everything go quiet for a second. When she finally pushed herself up, her arms screamed before the rest of her body caught up. Not broken, but bad enough. She sat there for a while, back against the wall, forcing herself to breathe evenly. No one was coming. No one even knew she was out there. That was the part that stayed with her longer than the pain. Out here, mistakes didn't come with backup. You either handled them or you didn't. She wrapped the arm as best she could, improvised a sling, and went back inside before the light dropped too low. That night, she didn't read the logbook. She didn't do anything except sit still and let the reality of it settle in. She could get seriously hurt out here, worse, and no one would know until it was too late. The next morning she almost left, not in a dramatic way. She didn't pack everything up or make a final decision. She just didn't start working right away. She sat on the steps outside, looking out at the water, letting the thought exist fully for the first time. She could walk away from this. No one would blame her, it wasn't hers in any meaningful way. Just a $10 mistake she could leave behind. She even stood up at one point, went inside, and looked at her bag like she might actually do it. But she didn't. Not because she was brave or stubborn or committed. None of those things felt true in that moment. She stayed because leaving didn't feel any clearer than staying. It just felt like trading one kind of uncertainty for another. So she kept going, slower, more careful, but still moving forward. Money became the next problem. The small amount she'd been living on wasn't enough anymore. Not with materials, not with repairs stacking up faster than she could keep up with. She avoided touching the money from the house for as long as she could, treating it like it wasn't really hers. But eventually that line blurred. Not all at once, just small withdrawals at first, enough for supplies, enough to keep things moving. Each time felt heavier than it should have, like she was taking something that didn't fully belong to her yet. The real breaking point came when she realized it still wouldn't be enough. Not for the bigger repairs. Not for the parts of the structure that couldn't be patched over. She made a list one night, sitting on the floor with a flashlight, going through what she actually needed versus what she could delay. It didn't add up. No matter how she rearranged it, there was a gap she couldn't close. That's when she looked at the bag. Her father's things had stayed untouched for weeks. Not out of reverence, exactly. More like hesitation. They were the last pieces of something she hadn't fully processed yet. The clock, the knife, small things that carried more weight than they should have. She picked up the clock first, turning it over in her hands, listening to the faint, steady ticking. It still worked. Of course it did. He had taken care of it. She didn't decide right away. She sat with it for a long time, longer than she had with anything else since arriving. There wasn't a clear right answer. Keeping it wouldn't fix anything. Selling it wouldn't erase what it meant. But it would give her something she needed now, not later, not in theory. Now. The next day, she took the boat back to the mainland and sold it. The transaction was simple. Too simple. The man who bought it didn't ask questions. He named a price, she accepted, and that was it, done in minutes. Over before it had time to feel like what it actually was. When she walked away, she didn't look back. Not because she didn't care, but because she knew if she did, she might hesitate, and hesitation wouldn't change anything. She used the money immediately. Materials, tools, things she'd been putting off. The work picked up again, faster now, more efficient. Progress became visible in a way it hadn't been before. Sections of the station started to feel solid again. Usable. Like something was actually being rebuilt, not just maintained. It was during one of those long days, working through a section of interior wall that had been too damaged to ignore, that everything shifted again. She had saved that part for last. Not consciously. It just hadn't been urgent enough compared to everything else. The wood was warped, discolored, clearly compromised. It needed to come out. She worked at it steadily, removing boards, clearing debris, focused on the task more than anything else. There was a rhythm to it now, something she had settled into without realizing. Remove, clear, replace. Simple, repeatable. Until it wasn't. One of the boards came loose differently than the others. Not just nailed in place, but set against something behind it. She paused, adjusted her grip, pulled it free more carefully. That's when she saw the space behind it. Narrow, intentional. Not damage, not decay, something placed there. She reached in slowly, not rushing, her hand brushing against rough wood before finding fabric. A pouch, heavier than it should have been. She pulled it out, set it down in front of her, and just looked at it for a second before opening it. Gold. Not a lot, not overflowing, but enough to change things. Enough to make everything she had been struggling with suddenly feel optional. There was something else in there too. A folded piece of paper, aged but intact. She recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. The same steady, deliberate lines from the logbook, Elias Ward. She sat back, the pouch in one hand, the letter in the other, and for the first time since she arrived, the question wasn't what she needed to do next. It was whether she still needed to do any of it at all. Lara didn't open the letter right away. She just sat there on the floor, back against the wall she had just torn open. The pouch of coins resting in her lap like something that didn't belong to her yet. The light had started to shift outside, late afternoon turning softer. The kind of light that usually told her it was time to stop working for the day. But she didn't move. For the first time since she arrived, she wasn't thinking about what needed to be fixed next. She wasn't thinking about the roof, or the floors, or how much work was still ahead of her. She was thinking about something much simpler and somehow heavier. She didn't have to do this anymore. That realization didn't come with relief the way she expected it to. It came slowly, almost cautiously, like her mind didn't fully trust it yet. She picked up one of the coins, turning it between her fingers. Solid, real. Not theoretical like the money sitting untouched in her account. This was different, immediate, usable. She didn't have to stretch supplies anymore, didn't have to calculate every decision down to the smallest detail. She could leave. Not eventually, not after finishing something now. When she finally unfolded the letter, she read it once, then again, slower the second time. Elias Ward didn't write like someone trying to be remembered. The words were simple, direct. No dramatic language, no attempt to turn what he had done into something larger than it was. He wrote about years spent watching a horizon that was empty more often than not. About nights where nothing happened, days that passed without a single reason for him to be there. And still, he stayed. Not because it guaranteed anything, but because the one time something did happen, someone needed to be looking. She folded the letter back along the same crease lines and set it beside her. For a long time, she didn't reach for it again. She didn't need to. The message wasn't complicated. It didn't ask anything from her directly. That was what made it harder. There was no instruction, no obligation. Just a truth left behind, waiting for whoever found it to decide what it meant to them. That night she packed. Not all at once. Slowly, almost methodically, like she was testing the idea instead of committing to it. She folded her clothes, placed the tools she'd bought back into her bag, wrapped the remaining supplies in a way that made sense for travel. Not for staying. The pouch of coins sat off to the side, within reach but not touched again. By the time she finished, the room looked different, less like a place someone was living, more like something being left behind. She didn't sleep much. Not because of the decision she had already made it, at least on the surface, but because everything felt unsettled again. the same way it had felt in those first nights after she lost the house, like she was between places, not fully in one life or the other. She told herself that was normal, that leaving was supposed to feel like this. In the morning she moved through the station one last time. Not as an owner, not even as someone trying to fix it, just as someone passing through. She noticed things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way the light hit the floorboards in the early hours. The sound of the wind moving differently through the repaired sections versus the ones still exposed. Small details, nothing that should have mattered, but they stayed with her as she walked. She carried her bag outside and set it down near the edge of the path leading toward the water. The skiff was still where she had left it, tied off, steady against the slow movement of the tide. Everything was ready. There was nothing left to do. She stood there longer than she needed to, not hesitating exactly, just not moving. The sound came so faint at first she almost ignored it. A crackle, uneven, buried under static. She turned slightly, listening without fully understanding what she was hearing. It came again, clearer this time, but still fragmented. Not wind, not the usual noise of the station settling, something else. She went back inside without thinking about it, following the sound more than deciding to. It led her toward the old radio equipment she had barely touched since arriving. She hadn't planned on using it. Didn't even know if it worked properly. But now it was there, active in a way it hadn't been before. The signal cut in and out, broken by interference, but the pattern was unmistakable. A voice. Weak, distant, struggling to come through clearly. She couldn't make out full sentences, just pieces. Enough to understand the intent. Someone was trying to reach anyone who might be listening. Lara stood there, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, her bag still outside, everything she needed to leave already in place. For a second nothing moved, not her, not the air, not even her thoughts. It was like the moment had stretched just enough to make space for a choice she hadn't expected to have to make. No one else was out here, no other stations active, no guarantee the signal was even reaching beyond this room. If she walked away now it would end exactly as it started. A voice calling out into nothing unanswered. She thought about the coins. About what they meant now. About how easy it would be to step back outside, untie the skiff, and let this place become what it had been before she arrived. Abandoned. Silent, not her responsibility. Then she looked at the radio again. The static shifted, the voice breaking through just enough to remind her it was real. Not an idea. Not a metaphor. Someone, somewhere, was waiting for an answer they might never get. Her decision didn't feel dramatic. It didn't come with a surge of certainty or some clear sense of purpose. It was smaller than that. Quieter. She stepped past the doorway, left the bag where it was, and moved toward the tower. The climb felt different this time. Not cautious, not exploratory, familiar. Like something she had already done enough times to trust her footing. When she reached the top, she didn't pause to take in the view. She didn't need to. She already knew what was out there. The mechanism for the light hadn't been used in years, but she had worked on it enough to understand how it functioned. It took effort to get it going again. Not smooth, not immediate, but it responded, slowly at first, then more steadily. When the light finally came on, it wasn't perfect. It flickered once, twice, before holding. A beam cutting out across the water, not strong enough to reach forever, but strong enough to be seen by something looking for it. She stayed there, one hand still on the controls, watching the line of light stretch into the distance. The radio below continued to crackle, the voice still there, still trying. For the first time since she found the gold, the question of leaving didn't feel urgent anymore. It didn't disappear completely. It just moved, became something that could wait. Out on the water, somewhere beyond what she could clearly see, there was movement. A shape, faint at first, then more defined as her eyes adjusted, not close, not safe yet, but heading in the right direction. Lara didn't say anything. There was no one to say it to. She just stayed where she was, watching, listening, holding the light steady. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, she wasn't stuck between past and future anymore. She was exactly where she needed to be. What stayed with me most about Lyra's story isn't the gold, or even the station, it's the moment she'd realized she didn't have to stay and chose to anyway. That kind of choice hits differently, because it's not about survival anymore. It's about who you decide to be when no one is forcing your hand. I think a lot of us have had a version of that moment, even if it looks less dramatic. Maybe it's walking away from something hard, or staying when it would be easier to leave. Maybe it's choosing responsibility when nobody's watching, or continuing something that doesn't seem to matter until it suddenly does. The truth is, most of life isn't made up of big, obvious turning points. It's made of quiet decisions like that one. The kind you don't post about, the kind no one claps for, but the kind that slowly shape who you become. What Lyra understood, maybe without even putting it into words, is that meaning doesn't always come from building something new. Sometimes it comes from continuing something that was already there. Paying attention. Showing up. Keeping the light on, even when it feels like no one is out there to see it. And that's not just about a lighthouse or a station by the sea. It's about the way we live day to day. The habits we keep. The people we show up for. The things we refuse to let fade, even when we're inconvenient or unnoticed. And maybe the real takeaway isn't about staying or leaving. It's about awareness. About recognizing that at some point, you do have a choice, and what you choose in that moment matters more than you think. Because it's easy to say you do the right thing when it's theoretical. It's harder when the easier option is right in front of you, ready to take you somewhere more comfortable. So I guess the question this story leaves you with is simple, but not easy when it's your turn. When you're the only one who can hear the call, what do you do? Do you walk away or do you stay and keep the light on?